Today, we're examining a critical report titled Systemic Fractures: Women as a Vulnerable Group in Australia. As we move through 2026, we find that despite our status as a developed nation, the status and welfare of women remain compromised by significant service gaps. We will explore why these fractures exist and how they impact frontline community service delivery.
Australia occupies a complex paradox. We have robust legislative frameworks and a national plan to end violence, yet we rank 24th globally for gender equality. This is what we call the implementation gap. In our sector, we see that vulnerability is not evenly distributed. It concentrates in fault lines where economic insecurity and housing failure intersect. For example, a woman might have the legal right to a protection order, but if she's in a fault-line town with no social housing, she may be forced to choose between violence or the street.
Let's look at the disconnect between policy and reality. Since 2022, $4 billion has been committed to women's safety. However, the outcomes are sobering. 37 women were killed by intimate partners in 2024 alone. About 25% of women today face compound vulnerabilities, meaning they aren't just facing one issue, but a cluster of systemic failures.
We often hear that the pay gap is closing, but the illusion of equality remains. Women earn 81 cents for every male dollar, an 18.6% gap that costs $52 billion in foregone earnings annually. In community services, we see this most clearly in nursing, a 90% female industry where women still earn 21% less than men. This isn't just a workplace issue, it's a primary driver of female poverty.
Violence is not just a physical threat, it is an economic mechanism of control that reduces independence. We call this the shadow pandemic. In the retail sector, 1 in 2 women experience sexual harassment, which often forces them to move to lower-paid but safer sectors. As service providers, we must recognize that a career change for our clients is often a survival tactic.
Financial insecurity is a deliberate outcome of abuse. Currently, 2.3% of women are affected by economic abuse. This leads to a situation where women are 45% more likely to face high financial stress compared to men. When a woman presents at your service with high debt, we must screen for coercive control. We cannot discuss vulnerability without addressing the crisis facing First Nations women. Hospitalization for family violence is 33 times higher for Indigenous women than for non-Indigenous women. A critical barrier is institutional distrust. Many fear that accessing mainstream services will lead to state child removal. In Brisbane, this fear contributes to First Nations people making up 25% of homeless families.
Structural poverty is often the result of the motherhood penalty. Poverty isn't accidental, it's the result of a system that financially penalizes caregiving. Women see a 55% salary decline in the 5 years following their first child. This creates a superannuation gap of up to 35% by retirement.
Single mothers are currently caught in a systemic trap, with 56% living below the poverty line. While eligibility for payments has expanded, 72% of recipients remain at poverty risk. The parenting payment single is structurally lower than the age pension. Furthermore, $1.7 billion in unpaid child support arrears acts as a secondary vector of financial abuse. Housing is the most visible fracture in our system. Domestic violence is the #1 driver of women's homelessness. We are seeing a rise in invisible homelessness, couch surfing or staying in abusive homes just to stay off the street. Women over 55 are the fastest growing cohort of the homeless population in 2026.
Vulnerability becomes exponential when factors overlap. For the 21.8% of the population who are women with disabilities,
The NDIS thin markets leave many without support. Perpetrators frequently exploit disability as a specific tool of control. We must move toward disability-inclusive safety planning.
Geography and culture also amplify risk. In regional areas, isolation creates physical barriers to services. For CALD women, perpetrators often weaponize systems, using visa dependence to threaten deportation or restricting access to interpreters to enforce isolation. Specialized services for these women remain seriously limited.
As we look at the response landscape in 2026, we see a system characterized by high activity but fragmented impact. The failure we are observing is not one of intent, but a failure in integration. Currently, the federal budget for 2025-26 has committed over $4 billion toward women's safety and a $790 million women's health package. We've also seen structural changes like expanding paid parental leave to 26 weeks, which now includes superannuation to address the retirement gap. In our sector, we see these policies as vital macro wins. However, the National Plan to End Violence and the Working for Women strategy only succeed if the local service ecosystem can handle the volume. For example, a tax cut for a female taxpayer is a positive step, but it doesn't solve the immediate crisis of a woman standing at your service door today with no place to go.
Moving from policy to the front line, we encounter the service ecosystem, a network of crisis entries like 1-800-RESPECT, legal health partnerships, and specialist homelessness services. Despite these entry points, we are facing a staggering supply crisis. Every single day in Australia, 295 requests for homelessness services go unassisted. This is where the systemic fracture becomes a reality for community workers. You might answer a call from the suicide callback service, identify a high-risk domestic violence situation, and provide the best legal advice through a health justice partnership. But if there are no beds in crisis accommodation, that woman is effectively being told to manage her own risk. As practitioners, we must advocate for integrated pathways where the legal, health, and housing responses are triggered simultaneously rather than in a sequence that often breaks down at the housing stage.
In our first critical gap analysis, we confront the economic disconnect. While the 2025-26 budget provides indexation to payments, it fails to address the structural deficit. Parenting Payment Single, PPS, remains mathematically and practically below the relative poverty line. For a single mother in 2026, living on approximately $72 per week after basic housing costs is not just difficult, it's a direct failure of the safety net. In the Australian community sector, we see this most clearly through the child support weapon. Despite a $1.7 billion arrears pool, the system often assumes women are receiving these funds, leading to a reduction in their family tax benefits. This creates a perverse poverty price for safety. Many women are forced to choose between the threat of a violent partner or the certainty of structural poverty for their children. As service providers, we must recognise that a survival budget in 2026 is often a driver for women returning to abusive homes. The second gap is the service silos, where the failure is not in our compassion, but in our integration. In Victoria, for instance, nearly 20% of family violence survivors are effectively ping-ponged, bounced back and forth between domestic violence agencies and homelessness services. This lack of integrated housing pathways means many women are forced to sleep in cars on the very night they seek protection. We must also address the protection versus support paradox. Currently, the co-location of child protection and domestic violence workers can actually deter reporting. Women fear that the system intended to protect them will instead be the one to remove their children. citing failure to protect while they themselves are being victimised. In our practice, we must advocate for secure housing as the pivotal factor. Without a stable front door, any psychological or legal intervention is likely to fail because the survivor is still in survival mode. We cannot treat a housing crisis as a separate issue from a safety crisis.
In conclusion, our analysis of the 2026 landscape reveals that vulnerability is a structural choice of the systems we build, not an inherent trait of the women we serve. To end these systemic fractures, we must stop treating safety, economic security, and housing as separate, siloed issues. Our path forward requires 3 fundamental shifts. First, economic reform. We must restore parenting payments to pension levels to ensure that caregiving does not lead to a lifetime of poverty. Second, housing first. We must shift our focus to building long-term social housing stocks. We have to recognize that crisis beds are merely temporary fixes for a permanent need for security. Third, system integration. We must decouple support from punishment, creating culturally safe pathways that allow women, particularly First Nations and cowled women, to seek help without fear of state intervention or deportation. For example, as future leaders in community service, your role is to look at the whole person. When you see a single mother struggling with debt, you aren't just seeing a financial issue, you are seeing the result of the motherhood penalty and a safety net that is currently below the poverty line. To truly serve the Australian community, we must advocate for a system where a woman's safety is not the price she pays for her economic survival. Thank you for your engagement today. I look forward to seeing how you apply this lens of structural prevention to your upcoming case studies.